It's Wednesday, it's 11:15 and we're live in Westminster as Sue Gray... With me today, Conservative MP Rehman Chishti, Labour MP Kim Leadbeater, The Spectator's Katie Balls and Adam Payne from the Politics Home website. Today, the Prime Minister has read it and it does include pictures. What does Sue Gray's report say about what went on in Downing Street during lockdown?
He wasn't saying, can everyone break up and go home? Can everyone socially distance? Can everyone put masks on? No, he wasn't telling anybody that. He was grabbing a glass for himself.
Will the Prime Minister survive? The Cabinet Secretary is also heavily criticised. The BBC understands he will not be resigning. We'll have the latest reaction, plus live coverage of Prime Minister's questions at noon. Also today...
We are expecting a price cap in October in the region of £2,800.
Energy bills set to hit record levels. What more help will the Chancellor offer?
We are sorry, owing to labour difficulties, very few trains will leave from Waterloo tonight.
Is it back to the 70s as rail unions vote for strike action and warn it could mean power cuts and empty shelves? Well, as we come on air, we know that the Sue Gray report, said to be 37 pages of text, then a series of photos. It has been delivered to Downing Street. The Prime Minister has read it, reading a print of it certainly at the moment. We are waiting for it to drop into the public domain so that we can see the contents. All quiet there outside the famous black door of number 10. We are expecting, after Prime Minister's questions, a statement from Boris Johnson responding to the contents of the Sue Gray report. The senior civil servant tasked with investigating parties and events during lockdown. It was interrupted, if you like, or put on pause while the Metropolitan Police investigated a series of events at Downing Street, and we know that Boris Johnson received a fine, a fixed penalty notice for one of those events, as did the Chancellor Rishi Sunak. As soon as we have any details or sight of that report, we will bring you what we can onto the programme right now. But first of all, before we get into the meat of the report, when it does finally get published, can the Prime Minister survive this, Rehman?
I think the answer to that is the Prime Minister, in the overall context for this specific incident, on the 18th of April, has apologised, frankly, and saying he was deeply sorry about the incidents that went on in number 10. And also, I think what we've seen is he was the one who asked for an independent inquiry by Sue Gray, which is what we have now.
He is her boss, of course, independent, impartial, not completely in that sense independent.
The point I would make on that is, as a civil servant, Sue Gray has always had the reputation of being impartial, fair and thorough.
So you think he can survive whatever is contained in this report?
No, what I'm saying to you is you need to take it into the whole context with regards to the circumstances we have. What happened during COVID-19 with incidents and behaviour of some individuals was completely unacceptable, and people were rightly angry with regards to what happened. So with regards to this today, I think it's absolutely right. We have the full publication, of this report today. Sure. Your question to me was, can he survive? And my question to you on that is we have to look at...
Well, I'm asking the questions, actually,
with the Prime Minister, in my view, the Prime Minister, in terms of what he has done over the last 2 years, taken us through COVID in those difficult circumstances, with Ukraine, I think we have to look at the whole context of what the Prime Minister has delivered so far.
All right, I'm going to come back to you shortly. But, Kim, can he survive this, the Prime Minister?
Can he survive? Knowing Boris Johnson, sadly, I think he possibly can survive. Should he survive? Absolutely not. I think, like so many people across the country, we are sick of hearing about this. We're sick of this ongoing saga. But it actually isn't about, again, who was there, who wasn't there, the details of these events. It's about the type of person we have running our country. And I want to see someone running our country who is a person of trust, integrity, compassion, understanding, not someone who thinks they're above the rules that apply to everybody else. And I just think the only way to move on from this is for him to go, for the Tories to find someone who's at least a little bit better than he is. But until this is all over and done with, we can't get to a point where we're looking at what our country needs. People are really struggling out there. The only way to move on is to get rid of Boris Johnson and to try and get some trust and some decency back in our politics.
Can he survive this?
I mean, I think it's possible he survives this. We have a situation where when Partygate stories first emerged, it was last year. And I think when the Prime Minister seemed the most vulnerable, it was January, February. Since then, I think the Prime Minister has used that time to try and change the team around him, to get MPs back on side. And he is in a better position than he was then to deal with this report. It could still be very tricky for him. Number 10 are very nervous about it. But there's also a question, which is, are we talking about the Prime Minister surviving in terms of, the next few months or even to the next election, or are we talking about re-election? Because there are two audiences here. There are MPs and there is the public. And I think that in terms of how you handle those and the views, they're in different places.
Adam?
Well, I think a conventional wisdom has set in over the last few weeks that in regards to Partygate and this story, that nothing can really happen to pose a serious threat to the Prime Minister. From conversations I had yesterday in Parliament, I became aware, I was told that there are numerous Conservative MPs who, and the words used in discussion with me was had their pens poised, i.e. they're waiting to see what Sue Gray says in this report before making a decision. However, I'd caveat with, over the last few months, since December, January, Conservative MPs have made a habit, perhaps even an art form, of picking moments where they're going to get rid of the Prime Minister. First it was, if he receives a fine from the police. Then it was, well, if we do badly at the local elections, then we'll get rid of him. For a number of Tory MPs, it was, let's wait for Sue Gray. Would not surprise me at all if they relocate the goalposts, if they say, actually, no, let's wait until the Privileges Committee completes its investigation into whether he misled the House. And, of course, we have two significant by-elections in Wakefield and in Devon on June the 23rd.
He has your full support then, Rehman Chishti, the Prime Minister?
I think the question on that is this. Who do I think at this point in time is best placed to lead our country, looking at the biggest challenges that we have in our country, whether it's dealing with Ukraine, whether it's dealing with cost of living, whether it's dealing with COVID with regards to the rollout of the vaccination. So for me, at this point in time, who do I think is the best person to lead our country in these difficult economic circumstances and having had a proven track record during COVID-19? And I think the Prime Minister is the person.
Right, so there's nothing in this report. You're not going to reserve judgment until we see what's in the Sue Gray report. There is nothing in there that will change your mind, just to be clear.
Just to be clear, you didn't hear what I said, Joe. I said at this point in time. So I said at this point in time with regards to looking at who is the best person to lead our country, having seen what they've done with regards to COVID, opening up our country, Ukraine. It is the Prime Minister, but of course, I do reserve my right as a Member of Parliament to look at the situations as to how things evolve over a period of time.
All right, let's talk to Vicky Young, the BBC's Deputy Political Editor. Vicky, just take us through the choreography that we expect this afternoon following Prime Minister's questions.
Well, we know that the Prime Minister has been reading this report and we know that he will appear for Prime Minister's questions and then there will be a statement to the House of Commons. Now, we understand that what he's expected to tell the House of Commons is, I commissioned this report to set the record straight and allow us all to move on. I accept full responsibility for my failings. I am humbled by the whole experience. We have learned our lesson. There is apparently a line in the report, this is from sources at number 10, from Sue Gray, that says she is pleased that progress is being made in addressing the issues that she raised. You can imagine that number 10 will be focusing on that rather than some of the probably very uncomfortable details that there will be about what exactly was going on, that really widespread law-breaking in number 10. So after Prime Minister's questions, a statement to the House of Commons, possibly a press conference, and then the Prime Minister will go to the 1922 committee. Now, you can see what they're doing here. He, at the end of today, will be able to say, look, I've taken questions in the House of Commons from the opposition parties, I've taken questions from journalists, I've taken questions from my own MPs, and now it is time to move on. And I agree with some of the panel there. I cannot see any scenario in which the Prime Minister will resign, and I'm not entirely sure that Tory MPs are at that point where they are going to act against him.
Vicky Young, we're going to take that statement live, as expected, at around 12:30. As you say, there is a day being set up for the Prime Minister to talk to the various audiences, whether it's within Parliament, members of the public, and then his own MPs. The last time he apologised publicly, he then actually changed his tone in private. Will that wash this time?
I mean, I think that is the issue that there is, but I think that lots of Tory MPs feel that they've heard enough and that they have made up their minds about all of this. They are, obviously, some of them think that there are better things to be talking about, that there's a cost of living crisis, and that's something they want addressed, and it's quite likely that that might be looked at tomorrow, and with a series of announcements from the Treasury about help for people. And then there are others who say that the Prime Minister should go, that he has lost all credibility with the public, that he will be a vote loser. So I think those have made up their mind, and as I say, I don't think they can agree on who they would want to replace him, and that at the moment is helping him a lot.
We're going to come back to you in just a moment, Vicky, because I understand now the report has been made public. It's dropped. I think we can see some pictures. Our guests here have some of the pictures that have been included in the report. We will try and bring those to our viewers and our guests here as soon as possible. But before we do that, Rehman Chishti, what would you like to hear the Prime Minister say in that statement?
Well, I think the reconfirmation of what the Prime Minister said on the 18th of April, when he made it very clear to Parliament, he was profusely sorry with regards to what had happened. He had accepted the full findings of the Metropolitan Police with regards to the fine that was issued against him. With regards to the lessons learned, he's already made a change in Number 10 in terms of how Number 10 operates and the culture. So I would like to see from the Prime Minister now, with regards to the next steps, how do we move forward with regards to learning lessons from what went on in Number 10, which was unacceptable, as to how we move forward now in terms of...
But what people will say, Rehman Chishti, is that he was there, he was present at a number of these events, and that actually the culture that has been talked about, that was running through parts of Whitehall and at Number 10, was underpinned by his own behaviour. The Panorama documentary with the BBC's Laura Kunsberg last night, with interviews of Downing Street staffers describing a culture of drinking, bottles everywhere, numerous leaving parties, general rule-breaking, a completely cavalier attitude to COVID restrictions that the rest of the country had been instructed to follow, and that culture was almost encouraged by Boris Johnson's behaviour. Let's take a listen.
So to be really clear about this, you and your colleagues felt that you had essentially permission from Boris Johnson to have these events. That's what you're saying?
Yeah.
Because
he was there. He may have just been popping through on the way to his flat, because that's what would happen. You know, he wasn't there saying this shouldn't be happening. He wasn't saying, can everyone break up and go home? Can everyone socially distance? Can everyone put masks on? No, he wasn't telling anybody that. He was grabbing a glass for himself. His principal private secretary himself was organising. His staff were organising parties.
Rehman?
I think with regards to what's been said, I think people listening will be, of course, absolutely angry, absolutely horrified with regards to what went on. But with regards to the Prime Minister, on the 18th of April, he apologised profusely with regards to, what had happened in Number 10. He took responsibility.
But why shouldn't he go? Why shouldn't he go? You just heard what the staff said there, that Boris Johnson gave them permission to do this, that is why these gatherings were taking place. Let's just show you. This is an image that's obviously included in the Sue Gray report. The 19th of June 2020, a gathering in the Cabinet Room in Number 10 Downing Street on the Prime Minister's birthday. Now, this is the event that the Prime Minister has actually been fined for. He was issued with a fixed penalty notice. The Chancellor is there too. We know what they have both said about it, and they have been fined. They broke the law that they set themselves. There's the picture. You can see there, glasses set up. Sandwiches and food. Yes, people have to eat and drink, but this was obviously set up with people there to celebrate the Prime Minister's birthday. Why, at the top of an organisation, does he not take ultimate responsibility and accountability?
And the fact is, Jo, I think on that, if I can finish on that, he has taken responsibility with regards to the fine that he was issued by the Metropolitan Police. He accepted, with regards to...
Are you saying he might not have accepted it and might not have paid it?
What I'm saying is, when you're trying to say X says this or Y says that, I'm saying with regards to the Prime Minister, the fixed penalty notice he was issued, he fully accepted it. With regards to having a full independent inquiry, he's had that. There will be a publication today. But of course, what went on in Number 10 during that period with the behaviour of some individuals and the culture was completely unacceptable. He's taken steps to rectify the structures in Number 10 as we move forward.
All right, let's just... Kim.
You're defending the indefensible, Rehman, and I feel sorry for you that you're having to do that. But you've got to think, right, if that had been your office and you'd have walked in on that when we were in lockdown, what would you have done? I would have said, whoa, hang on a minute, what are you doing? The country's in lockdown, people can't go to funerals, they can't go to see their kids be born. You'd have said this shouldn't be happening. I mean, it would never have happened in my office because I wouldn't have allowed it to. And I honestly think the decent people in your party feel the same.
Well, look, Kim, what I would say, I think we've also got a situation at the moment where there are issues and concerns with regards to the leader of the opposition by Durham Police Constabulary. No, it's not different, because the issue is with regards to rules and the application of rules. So the question I would say, for me, I'll say this to you now on TV, whatever the Durham Constabulary find, in that case, I will accept it. I'm not going to challenge that. The fact is, because I respect the independent authority of the police on that. So I would say, with regards to what we're seeing today, what happened in that period was completely unacceptable. People have right to be angry. The Prime Minister has taken responsibility with regards to the matter against, or the one matter against him, and also with regards to changing the procedure and the processes.
All right, and we'll come on to the Labour leader in just a moment. This is another image from that same gathering. That's Simon Case there on the left of the image, the top civil servant, the Cabinet Secretary. We already understand he's not going to resign over this. If you were just looking at that image, there has been a lot of speculation that the Metropolitan Police didn't go further and hand out more fines to the Prime Minister, because this was deemed to be the least egregious of some of the events. And looking at that, would you agree?
I mean, I think if you look at the reports we've had of the other events, they seem, I think, and particularly this is the view of Tory MPs, they seem to be on the more serious end of the spectrum. So I think, for example, a meeting, birthday cake between meetings compared to some of the other alleged events, such as boozing in the Number 10 flat or a garden party involving trestle tables, was seen to be on the worst end of the spectrum. And therefore you've got a situation now where we're already seeing lots of the junior officials who feel as though they've been hung out to dry because they've been fined for these, probably, I think it's fair to say, more serious events, while the Prime Minister has not. I think it's interesting looking at these photos, though, because there was lots of puzzlement, I think, when Rishi Sunak received a fine. And obviously we do not know the Met's exact workings or plans. The process is fairly opaque, but I do think one of the things is the fact that there are photographs. That is seems to be the reasoning amongst, I think, some Rishi Sunak supporters as to why he ended up with one, and we're obviously seeing that now.
Yeah, I'm being sent lines from the report by very helpful colleagues. I think it's probably worth reading them out. One of the lines Sue Gray has written says, even allowing for the extraordinary pressures officials and advisers were under, the factual findings of this report illustrate some attitudes and behaviours inconsistent with that guidance, and goes on to say, the senior leadership at the centre, both political and official, must bear responsibility for this culture. And I think particularly that second line I just read out was pretty strong in its language, given the context of how far civil servants can go with what they say. In reports, they have to exercise a certain level of restraint. And I think that second, I mean, I'm just reacting to this as I get it, but that second line, if I was a Conservative MP who was a bit unsure how to react to it, if I was feeling a bit nervous, that second line in particular, I think, will be...
Well, the bearing responsibility, of course, the interim findings also said there was a complete failure of leadership, or serious failings in leadership at Number 10 and in Whitehall. This is another picture that is included in the report, the 13th of November 2020. This is a leaving do. There seem to be a lot of these going on. A gathering in Number 10 Downing Street on the departure of a special advisor. You can see clearly there the Prime Minister raising a toast. The impression is that he was dropping in on these events. Rehman, just looking at the pictures, what do they say to you? I mean, what's your reaction when you look at the pictures?
Look, Joe, I've been always straight with you on that. If I saw that picture, of course I'd be angry. Of course I'd be angry with that. And therefore, I don't know the circumstances, what led the Prime Minister to be there on that occasion. But if I was looking at that picture there, with regards to what the public were doing at that time, they would have expected everyone to do everything they can, both in perception and in act, to do the right thing. The fact over here is the picture you showed over here was investigated by the police, but they chose not to issue a fixed penalty notice for that. You've asked me about the picture. I would be angry by it, but it was investigated by the police, but no action was taken.
In terms of what you've just heard of some of the lines, of course, we haven't seen the full report. Would you expect a senior civil servant or Simon Case himself to go over this, Rehman? If there was a culture that existed, are you surprised to hear that he has said reportedly that he is not going to go, the Cabinet Secretary?
Well, look, I think looking at what's just been said, I haven't seen the report, but with regards to saying the culture, the issue with leadership, both political and at civil level, you know, responsibility needs to be taken. That's why I would very much like to see the statement at 12:30 by the Prime Minister with regards to how we move forward with regards to addressing those two specific points in the report.
I mean, I think that's an interesting question of precedent, because some people said, oh, Simon Case could be lined up as a fall guy. I think that were Simon Case to choose to resign, and we now understand that he is currently not planning to do that, that sets a tricky precedent for Boris Johnson if you look at the findings of the report. I don't think it's in Number 10's interest for Simon Case to go on this, because if Sue Gray, as she has said in this report, you know, both in the first chapter and now in this part, that the responsibility lies on those leading both the political side and also the officials, that would mean that people would say, well, Boris Johnson, why is Simon Case taking responsibility and not you? So I think if they both stay put, that probably makes things a little bit, in a strange way, easier for Boris Johnson, at least in the short term.
Just to give you a flavour of the culture, according to staffers at Downing Street, again from the Panorama documentary last night. This is another excerpt talking about one of the security staff there. If we don't have it, we can hold on to it.
I remember when a custodian tried to stop it all, and he was just shaking his head in this party, being like, this shouldn't be happening. People laughed at him. People made fun of him because he was so worked up that this party was happening and it shouldn't be happening.
To that, Rehman, that is a sense of coming into a room and saying this is wrong. Coming into a room and saying we need to break this up. We need to stop this kind of thing happening, versus an extension of work existing in a bubble that was at Downing Street at very stressful times. Where do you think the public will be on that?
Well, I think this is the first time I'm hearing these interview clips that are being shown now. But of course, I think when public hear that, they'll be angry, they'll be upset, because remember, everyone across the country sacrificed in those difficult, challenging times, and they would have expected, you know, people in those leadership positions to uphold the rules that they made. However, I accept that, you know, and the government and the Prime Minister has accepted, you know, that rules were broken, and he's taken responsibility for that. The next question now is with regards to what, with the point which Adam raised on those two specific paragraphs, is how do you address the issue with the culture, both at political level and at the civil level, to move forward. The Prime Minister has taken one step already with regards to the restructuring at Number 10 with a new Chief of Staff and a new Prime Minister's Department. But of course, those are the answers that members of Parliament will be looking to have at 12:30.
Let's just show you this image of the Prime Minister. Here he is at his desk reading the report, the Sue Gray report. You can see serious look on his face, as you can imagine, obviously digesting its contents before appearing at Prime Minister's Questions. Vicky Young, the BBC's Deputy Political Editor, is with us now. Have you had a chance to read any of the report, Vicky?
Yeah, so I've been looking through some of it, and I think what is interesting is that the pattern that you can see emerging here is of quite often leaving events where a speech was made, sometimes by the Prime Minister. He was there for a short time. There was alcohol, people gathered. He then, in most of these occasions, seems to have left, but then they seem to have then developed into more of a party. And in some cases, with the details here, some people still there at 11 o'clock at night, and then another one. This particular one we've heard quite a lot about, April the 16th, 2021, where there were two events, and they were one of them for James Slack, who was the Director of Communications, who was leaving. And that became a full-blown party. And they can see, because you have an entry and exit log of people going into Number 10, that the last person left that event at 4:20 in the morning. So you can see how these events became completely out of control. There was no doubt that they were parties. But of course, a lot of these, the Prime Minister wasn't there, and I think that's what the focus will be. He will take responsibility for the fine that he was issued with, but as you can see from those pictures, that doesn't look like the most egregious of the offences that were taken place, where he's there with a can of soft drink in his hands, and he will talk about apologising for all of that. But some of these other events do seem to have been a lot more out of control. But interestingly, the report says that junior staff really did in some ways take their lead from senior staff. Now, we're talking there in a lot of times about senior civil servants, so the official side of the leadership inside Number 10. And some of them said to me, look, they felt that because there were senior people there, of course you would go along to something that the Prime Minister was going to be at. That's what happened, especially if you've got an invitation from someone who's very senior, potentially one of your bosses. And that seems to have been what's happened there, is that those junior members of staff, as we heard in Panorama last night, felt they had permission in a way to go to some of these events. What they then went on to become, which is obviously with a lot of drink, a lot of alcohol, staying very late, sometimes into the early hours of the morning. That was how they then developed.
Right. Vicky Young, thank you very much. We'll come back to you as soon as we can. We are talking about 126 fines in total, 83 people, Downing Street being the most fined addressed in the country, so far as we know. Conservative MPs, like Rehman Chishti, it'll be their reaction that is absolutely critical. From what you've heard so far and what you've been reading, Katie, does this change things?
So clearly we are sat in the studio, so we're only seeing parts of the report. I think that there are lots of Tory MPs who just don't want to talk about Partygate. They would love it if they never heard about it ever again. It's not going to happen, because not only do we have this report, there's also the Privileges Committee that is like to go to the autumn. I think the risk to Boris Johnson today is a lot of people, especially you look at public opinion, have already made their mind up on Boris Johnson and Partygate. But does this reopen it? Does it tell us things we don't know? I think that 4 a.m. detail is little things like that are going to irk some MPs. And for example, I'm looking at a tweet by Anushka Slana, which says, one Number 10 advisor message Martin Reynolds. This is about that bring your own booze warning, the bring your own booze party with the trestle tables, warning that a press conference was finishing. So in quote marks, it'd be helpful if people can be mindful, not waving bottles of wine, etc. Now, I think things like that bring things back to life and make it much harder for Tory MPs to say this is all done.
All right, we're going to talk about the cost of living because, as you say, that is what the government would like to talk about. We had been expecting an announcement, but perhaps not as imminently as we're now expecting in terms of measures from the government. Let me just show you this headline in the Daily Telegraph. Windfall tax within days as Prime Minister seeks to throw off Partygate. Adam, what do you make of the reports now that we could have some sort of announcement in terms of help for struggling families much sooner than we'd thought?
Well, I think there are multiple elements to that. Firstly, the Treasury's thinking up until quite recently was it would be more prudent to hold off until the autumn with the more significant measures, because that's when things are going to get worse. It'll be colder, more energy usage, the cap's going to go up, as you know, again. However, that line just hasn't sustained. I know the Conservative MPs have been telling the whips, my constituents they're scared, they're angry, they need help now. So I feel like the government acting sooner was inevitable. However, over the last few weeks, there has been a consensus in the Tory party that something needs to be done, but there hasn't really been a consensus of what exactly needs to be done. There's a group of MPs who want to restore the universal credit uplift. There's a group of MPs who want to see a windfall tax, others dead against it. And let's bear in mind, last week, Tory MPs were told by whips to vote against a Labour amendment calling for a windfall tax. It looks like potentially very soon they'll be told to vote for one. And we actually picked up at Politics Home frustration among Tory MPs that they're going to have to vote potentially in the opposite way in a few weeks' time.
Of course, this follows yesterday. This is the head of Ofgem suggesting that the energy price cap, so that is the cap on energy tariffs for a standard tariff, could go up to as much as £2,800 in October. Again, we weren't expecting any figures for a few months or so, or certainly no confirmation. But I think we can just show you here, you can see the spike. The first price cap in March, coming in the summer, over £1,900, and there it is, £2,800. What was your reaction? I will come to you, Kim, I promise, in a minute. What was your reaction, Rehman, first of all, when you heard the £2,800 possibly as the higher end there for the price cap in October?
Well, Joe, I think the biggest issue facing my constituents in Gillingham and Rainham is the issue with cost of living and energy prices. And that is something for me as a Member of Parliament, you're fed into the government to say we need to do everything we possibly can.
And what would you like that to be? Windfall tax?
I would say nothing should be off the table. I come from it in politics from lower taxation, high economic productivity. With regards to your point on the windfall tax, is that one of the options that should be considered as a way to address the issue of cost of living? The answer to that is yes, of course it should be explored. We intervened in 2014, but what I would say is simply to say when Labour put it forward, the windfall tax, do that because it may be the populist thing to do. The fact is, going down that route, the oil and the energy sector creates 200,000 jobs, mostly in Scotland and the North. So you have to make sure you do the right thing.
All right, but broadly, you think yes, that should be. That should be the. What about uprating benefits in line with inflation and bringing that forward?
I think that the point you're saying on that, Joe, is that's Ian Duncan Smith's point with regards to the uplifting.
Well, is he right?
Well, I would say everything should be on the table. I have huge amount of respect for. No, look, I think that is.
What are you waiting for?
But I think that is the difference between the Labour and the Conservative. Just do it. The fact is, if you make these decisions, you're going to have a knock-on effect. With regards to windfall tax, absolutely it should be considered. But if at the same time you take that windfall tax approach, and at the same time you have a knock-on effect with the 200,000 jobs in that sector, it's a bit like Labour. Give it in the right hand, take away from the left hand. Explored, but do it in a structured way.
Well, where Raymond is right, the windfall tax that Labour have put forward, now we can see the upper end of the energy price cap, £2,800. The windfall tax that you're suggesting is just not going to alleviate or mitigate the rise.
It won't solve everything, will it? But it'll certainly give people who are struggling the most a helping hand. It should have been done much sooner than now. We should have had the windfall tax. We've been calling for an emergency budget. We should have never had that taking away the £20 uplift in universal credit. These are the people who are struggling more than anybody.
So what would Labour do to help them further than the windfall tax?
Well, I think we've got our plans together for a fairer tax system. We should be looking at housing insulation. We should be chasing the 11
housing insulation is going to take a very long time. And you and other Labour representatives have said the help needs to be right now. The windfall tax is fine. We're thinking it's going to raise about £2 billion. That is not going to meet the sort of £800 increase in energy bills that people are going to see going into the autumn without further government intervention. So what else is Labour suggesting?
I agree, it's challenging, but we will be chasing the £11.8 billion that got written off in fraud and error, government error during the pandemic.
Right, but where are you chasing it from? But I mean, the thing is, people will want to know what are the firm, concrete proposals from Labour beyond the windfall tax.
I agree, and that's what we're putting together. But the fact that we should never have got rid of the £20 universal uplifting credit, uplifting universal credit, we should have put the windfall tax in, we should never have written off the billions of pounds worth in fraud. So there's lots of things there that should never have happened to get us to this point. The emergency things that we can do now, certainly the windfall tax is a really good starting point for that, and we need to see that as soon as possible. The fact that this is going to be announced the day after the Sue Gray report comes out, I think is tragic. And the fact that what this government is doing is not helping the people who are struggling the most. And these are the people who will be wholly insulted by what's coming out today in the Sue Gray report. The people who kept our care homes going and our hospitals going, kept our delivery drivers from getting stuff to us that we really needed it. So it just says about the whole way that this government approaches things.
Can I just make one point on that, if I may? You say the point, it's, I think with fairer taxation and the question by Joe, where you can get the money from. You said windfall tax is one, but you're now putting your details together. But now that you're putting your details together, that wouldn't have addressed this issue a week and a half ago when you were asking to vote on it, because you had no details at the time, apart from windfall tax and 28,000 extra, 28 billion borrowing.
It's a starting point, isn't it? You've got to start somewhere to help people most in need.
What is the package?
We should have also never taken away that £20. You know, I'm thinking about the poorest people in society, but I'm also thinking about people who are working. People are writing to me who are nurses and police officers. You've got to do something to try and help them.
We have with the 22 billion. We have.
Right. Well, on this £22 billion package, which the government did present, they haven't been given any credit for it, have they, really? Do you think the government feels it's been wasted insofar as some sort of political return for them? Because if you look at this tweet from the Institute for Fiscal Studies, it says inflation for the poorest households could hit 14% this October compared to 8% for the richest. Yesterday's Ofgem announcement of an £800 increase to the tariff cap indicates poorer households will be hit hardest by energy price increases. Is that why there's been a hesitation about what action to take and a division in Cabinet?
I mean, I think there's a few reasons for the division. I think that if you look at what's been spent so far, there's definitely a frustration that they have got very little credit for spending billions, and that leads to a blame game. And some say, well, that is the Chancellor's fault because he's chosen more techie measures that he might think are the best ways to address it, but they don't translate in the way something like just scrapping the national insurance rise, which moving the thresholds is a more complicated move. So that's one side of it. I think you also get to the point which is it hasn't happened for some time, but these days you hear Tory MPs almost talking about the Osborne-Cameron era with a slight sense of a longing. And this is because they had a long-term economic plan. And I think that Tory MPs feel that there is not a coherent economic message at the moment. And that is because it is not exactly clear what the government wants to do. It doesn't want to provide immediate relief for cost of living. Yes, but does it also want to control spending or does it want to boost the economy? Now, no one really disagrees with any of those things, but they do often require different actions as a priority, and that is one of the things. But I think there is an acknowledgement in the Treasury now that when it comes to the worst off in society, they do need to do more, and that's why if we get the announcement tomorrow or later on, I think that is going to be a big focus of it and where the bulk of the money goes for now.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few problems for the government here. And firstly, even if they do announce a fresh package of support, we're expecting, as I said, potentially as soon as tomorrow. We're certainly expecting it before the summer recess in the next few weeks. Is just announcing it enough? Because it's all going to be about impact and how people feel. Do people feel that their situation is getting better? How long will it take for these measures to have a discernible effect on people? And another point I'd make, Joe, is that yesterday we had an interesting indication from Downing Street that when it comes to deciding how much to raise public sector pay in the next few weeks, they are concerned that raising it so much could further fuel inflation. Obviously, there are calls for unions, for public sector workers to have their pay raised in line with inflation. And that indication we got yesterday from Downing Street that ministers aren't really keen on that idea has already prompted fury from unions. So I think in this cost of living debate, another potential row, flashpoint, however you want to describe it, awaits when the government decides how much to increase public sector pay by.
Do you think it could actually worsen inflation in that sense?
I guess it's a very difficult balance, isn't it? But I think equally we've got so many people out there who are working in the public sector who really are struggling to pay their bills. I think we've got to give them some support in their hour of need. And the return of the triple lock, of course, could fuel it even further then if you're thinking about uprating pensions in line with inflation, possibly at 10%.
I think, Joe, the reason we're in the position where we're in is, as the Governor of the Bank of England said, 80% of these factors which are leading us to make these difficult, challenging decisions is because of external factors, what's going on around the world in Ukraine and the issue with the food security impacting back us here in the United Kingdom. Standing up for what's right in Ukraine for their freedom and liberty, absolutely right, but it has a knock-on effect. In answer to the question, what Adam said, a link to you, people want tangible results with regards to they see the positive difference in their lifestyles and the quality of life where the hardest hit.
So what would you favour most? A cheque being sent to the poorest families of £1,000? As a suggestion from, well, it was George Osborne, I think.
I think what I would say with that, Joe, is I think looking at what we have done with the national insurance changes that we've put in place,
coming in July,
better off. With regards to universal credit taper relief, 1,000 better off. With regards to the fuel duty freeze on that, yes.
All right.
With regards to rebate on energy, we've already done that as part of the 22 billion. But of course, we should do more, and we should look at all avenues of doing that.
Let me just show you this in the Daily Mirror while we are talking about cost of living and calls for wage increases. Power cuts, fears over rail strikes. Union boss urges government to back down. This is the RMT who have voted for widespread rail strikes. It's been called a summer of discontent. Do you support the strike action, Kim?
Let's hope we do not get to that stage. Strikes would be so disruptive for our country at a time when people...
So should the unions back down from doing this?
I think they need to get round the table. The only way to solve this is to get round and negotiate and hear everybody out. So I think that's really, really important. We don't want strikes. We must do everything we possibly can to avoid strikes. So get round the table and hear each other out.
I mean, they've been accused of preemptive action before even having those discussions. Was that the right thing to do?
No, I mean, I don't think that's helpful. I think let's get round the table, let's have the discussions and move forward from there because, you know, we cannot have more disruption. The country's been through so much in these last few years. Last thing we need is no trains.
All right, let's go back to Vicky Young. She has been looking in more detail in the contents of the Sue Gray report. What have you found?
Well, I mean, it is the kind of embarrassing detail which I think we were expecting, and we have obviously read about and heard about. Now, none of that, of course, came from Metropolitan Police. They didn't give any details about these events and what went on. We've known before about the Deputy Cabinet Secretary, Helen McNamara. There was an event that evening, and she provided a karaoke machine. Now, she was fined and has apologised for all of that. There was then another party on the 18th of June, and again they start as events with speeches and then they move on to carry on, and it says it went on, this event, for a number of hours. There was excessive alcohol consumption by some individuals. One individual was sick. There was a minor altercation between two other individuals. The event broke up in stages. Some stayed to tidy up, and the last person left at 3:13 in the morning. And then there's a very short paragraph about a gathering in the flat of number 10 where Mr Johnson lives with his wife. Now, we've seen, again, reports. Some of us have been told by people who said they heard ABBA music coming out of there late at night. This was the night that Dominic Cummings and Lee Kane left as advisors from the Prime Minister. We know there was a fine for the leaving event, the one we've seen the photos of, which Boris Johnson attended briefly. He wasn't fined. We know another individual was. But there was a lot of speculation about this event in the Downing Street flat. And interestingly, Sue Gray, talking about that, says that she was just starting to look into it when the Met Police started their investigation. And so she decided to stop investigating it. All she knew is that there were 5 special advisors attended it. She called it a meeting in the flat. The Prime Minister joined them at about 8 o'clock. There was food and there was alcohol. The discussion carried on later into the evening with attendees leaving at various points. But she says the information about all of that is limited because the police have never told us anything about that one. As far as we know, no one was fined for that. We certainly know that Carrie Johnson wasn't, that Boris Johnson wasn't. We don't know about anybody else. And so that has never been looked into again by Sue Gray.
Vicky Young, thank you very much for the moment. Of course, we've got Prime Minister's questions coming up in the next 5 minutes or so. You can see inside the chamber, filling up with MPs. I understand the questions from Keir Starmer could well be on the cost of living, Kim, rather than perhaps on the issue of Partygate and the Sue Gray report. Is that because you would accept it's difficult for the Labour leader, because, of course, he is also under investigation by the Durham police for an event. It was a campaign meeting with activists, the picture and the image of Keir Starmer with a beer. And he has said, the Labour leader, I will resign if I get issued with a fixed penalty notice. Is this a plague on all your houses?
No, absolutely not. And if Keir Starmer chooses to talk about cost of living crisis in PMQs, that's because this is the biggest issue that the country's facing at the moment, and quite right too.
Did you spend too much time talking about Partygate in the past? There were reports, admittedly rejected, by members of the Shadow Cabinet complaining that Keir Starmer spent too much time on this issue.
No, I think it's got to be a balance, hasn't it? We've got to know where the country's at, but we've also got to make sure that we are addressing the issues around the culture and the leadership of our country at the moment, and that's what we're trying to do when we're talking about Partygate. But equally, it is very important that we focus on cost of living, because that's where most people are. So we've got to be able to do a little bit of both. But this is about, you know, decency, it's about integrity, and everything we're hearing about this Sue Gray report just makes me more and more angry. You've got to remember what most of us were doing during those months of lockdown.
Not very much.
Not very much, exactly. We certainly were, you know, the nurses weren't going out afterwards and having a few drinks after they put their shift in. They weren't having parties in care homes. They weren't doing all those things. You know, that's what really, I think, really resonates with people. And the fact that that entire culture was based around having fun and parties and playing ABBA music, it's just sickening.
And do you think it's been a good way to spend money, value for money, the police investigation? £460,000, 12 detectives, this, as we heard from Vicky Young, interrupting the Sue Gray report. Has it been worthwhile, Rehman?
I think it's absolutely right and proper that there should be accountability with regards to the behaviour of individuals across the board, no matter who they are. So I fully respect the Prime Minister asking for an independent inquiry, because the opposition made it a top issue that needs to be looked at, absolutely. And on that basis, I fully support the full independent inquiry that's carried out by the Met into this matter.
And you still think of Boris Johnson as a man of integrity and honesty?
I would say the Prime Minister has demonstrated across the board with this specific issue that he's prepared to take responsibility when issues have, when mistakes have been made. And he has taken responsibility both on the 18th of April when he was issued with a fixed penalty notice. And I think for me, the Prime Minister has been very clear what happened at number 10 with the culture during COVID-19 when some of these incidents happened was completely, utterly unacceptable.
And he was in charge
He's
of it.
taken. No, that's the difference between Kim. I think that where Kim, this is where Labour want to keep pushing right on that. The fact is, what Adam just said, those issues both with political leadership and the civil service leadership on this both needed to be addressed, and I'm looking forward to that statement at 12:30.
Adam, do you think it is a bit difficult for Keir Starmer to talk about the issues around Partygate when he's in the position he is too?
Oh, undoubtedly. I think if Keir Starmer hadn't had an investigation launched by Durham Police, there's a very good chance he'd be leading on the Sue Gray report in PMQs today. You've just said that...
Well, that's what we understand.
We understand that he'll be leading on cost of living, so undoubtedly he's in a different situation. What I was going to say, Joe, was I'm just sort of scrolling through Twitter like everyone else is, looking at pictures and particular lines, and while Labour might want to move the conversation on, I'm thinking about that by-election in Neil Parish's former seat, Tiverton Honington, where the Lib Dems are going to throw the kitchen sink at it. Some of this stuff that's on Twitter is going to make pretty difficult campaign material, I think, come that by-election for the Conservatives.
Do you agree that actually, those may be difficult, more difficult points, the by-elections and their outcomes?
Yes, I think Adam's right to say at the start of the show there, which is people like to move the goalposts, and we talk up crunch moments, and often they can come and go. But I do think if you look at the two by-elections that day, one is a red wall seat, one is where the Lib Dems oppose the threat. If you lose both, I think you start to see the Tories feeling very squeezed, and that could lead to some panic. But I think let's see what the tone of the Prime Minister is today. Last time he joked around with Tory MPs at the 22 committee. I suspect he has been advised against that today. But I think things like that are also as important when it comes to the weeks building up to that by-election.
All right, let's just pause for a moment, because I can see Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker, talking now just ahead of Prime Minister's questions. And, of course, we've got the statement from Boris Johnson following this session of PMQs at 12:30, when he will respond in full to the Sue Gray report, which, of course, contains not just text but the pictures, some of which we have shown you throughout this programme. We'll have more reaction after that statement. There'll be a response, no doubt, from Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, too. I can't at the moment hear exactly what the Speaker is talking about, but I think he's introducing PMQs now.
Minister,